The following presentation is brought to you by the Realm Network. This is Vince Russo's The Brand.
It's right about time again to swerve again.
Listen, man, I'm so stoked about my next guest. But before I bring him on, I have to share a little story with you. And the reason why I'm doing that is because, listen, I honestly think this may have been the kindest gesture that anybody did for me in my wrestling business career. And I started in about 1991, so it's been about 25 years. But the story goes something like this. Since 1999, for about 16 years, all I heard from everybody was Vince Russo killed WCW. Vince Russo killed WCW. There's a book that was written about it, The Death of WCW, with Vince Russo on the cover. This went on literally for 16 years. Finally, my next guest went on a talk show all the way over in the UK, and they tried to pin him down. They tried to get him to confirm the story that Vince Russo had indeed killed WCW. Now, it would have been the easy thing for my guest to do. It would have been the cool thing for my guest to do. But my guest didn't do that. My guest went the other way, and without a shadow of a doubt, he said, Vince Russo did not kill WCW. It was over before he got there. Vince was just trying to support his family like everybody else. And I have to tell you, from that moment on, 16 years of me hearing this absolutely came to a crashing halt. And it was at this time that I realized the Pope had spoken. Because if anybody else would have said this, it wouldn't have mattered. But this was the Pope. And when the Pope said this, I was freed of this 16-year hell. There's only one person that could be the Pope, and that's Mr. Ric Flair. Rick, welcome to the show.
Hey, Vince, how are you?
I'm all right, Rick.
I didn't realize it was that big a deal at the time, but I just assured everybody there at that Q&A that ship had sailed long before you got there, buddy.
Well, Rick, that did wonders for me, and I can't thank you enough. And, Rick, listen, I want to lay out something else at the beginning of the show. I want to see if this is okay with you. Rick, I was really blessed. Probably it was about maybe 6 months before he passed away. Roddy Piper called me and invited me on his show.
Yes.
Yeah, and I was on Roddy's show. Rick, it had to be for a good hour and a half. And, Roddy, man to man, any problems he had with me, any questions, any heat, he addressed me directly man to man. When we got through with that conversation, there was a respect now between the both of us that meant the world to me. After that point, Roddy and I we were exchanging text messages and keeping in touch, and it meant the world to me. Now, Rick, I did your show. I play at CBS. I did your show, and I'm getting these tweets that, oh, my God, the Nature Boy and Vince Russo, I can't believe it. I never thought I'd see it, yada, yada, yada. And I basically were answering people back saying this. Listen, I don't think there's any heat between Ric Flair and myself. We all need to get along. We're all in this life together. So, Rick, what I'd like to do before we have this conversation, is it cool with you if I can dedicate this interview with you to the late, great Roddy Piper?
Oh, I think it's an awesome idea. I'm sure everybody listening knows how close Rod and I were. I went to the funeral. It was devastating, but I'm glad that it happened the way it did. If it had to happen, he went fast. He went in his sleep. He didn't die in pain. He wasn't in the hospital for a prolonged period of time. So, as sad as it was, and Michael Hayes kind of brought that to my attention. He said, "Jesus Christ, we can't cry over Roddy Piper. He did it all." It'd be kind of like somebody crying and say, "Geez, Ric Flair died. Too bad. He didn't have any fun in life." fly to me and Rod. So, yeah, it was a horrible couple of weeks, but God, the guy's in a good place, and the family. The funeral was phenomenal. His family was there. It was really well done, and he's a great guy. One of a kind, talent-wise.
Yeah, and Rick, the thing I'll always remember about Roddy, because I got to work with him at WCW, then he kind of came in and out a few times at TNA. And the one thing that always stayed with me, and it means so much to me now, was, even if he had heat with me at the time, if he wasn't seeing eye to me, whatever it was, Roddy ended every conversation with me with "God bless you, sir," and I'll never forget that, Rick.
Yeah, I know, and that's who Roddy was, and just so you know, so this will really clear the air between you and I. Did you ever negotiate one of my contracts?
Absolutely not. I had nothing to do with that.
How could I ever be upset with you?
Yeah, no, well, Rick, that's the thing. All of a sudden...
No, I mean, people need to understand that. The things that cause issues are, number one, holding talent down. That causes a big issue. Suppressing people that have talent. And then money issues. And you never had any of that at all as part of your life with me. I mean, so if people are wondering who and they don't have heat anymore, but it's, if I'm Ric Flair and I'm wrestling, I won't even use their name, and I'm making $500,000 and they're making $1.5 million, that's heat.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you know what it is, Rick? I think...
And without mentioning names, there was about 7 of them. And then there was another guy making $20 million a year. Who would have never got over if I had done it for $500,000.
Yeah,
so,
yeah, exactly. And, Rick, people, I don't know what it is about the internet and, people who think they're in the wrestling business and they're really not. But I think sometimes people get confused. They think if you have, creative differences with somebody, or if somebody doesn't see a storyline the way you do, like if I want to drop a Ric Flair off in the desert and he doesn't agree with that, people immediately think those creative issues are personal issues, and they're two completely different things.
You can't. They're probably personal for an hour, but you can't live your life like that. If people did that in this business, they would never succeed because it changes every day. It's just like, in all fairness, I'll give you an example. Next, let's see, on tomorrow, the rosters of the NFL are cut down to 53, right?
Right.
Well, and there's probably going to be 20 kids on each team that have become relatively close to their coach, and they're gone. But it's the way of the world. So, and the coach has got to love that kid, but, he doesn't fit, doesn't work. So,
now
our business is very simple.
Now, Rick, this is going to be a different kind of interview because, listen, I'm not the wrestling guy, that we're going to talk a million questions you've been asked before. I'm not into that. I'm interested in Ric Flair. And, Rick, here's the first question I have to ask you. I don't think you really know the stories that I know of the legend of Ric Flair because, Rick, you have to remember, I had a very close relationship with Terry Taylor. And I know Terry Taylor spent a lot of time with you. So, Rick, I've heard
if we want to keep you on the clear channel, we probably shouldn't discuss those stories.
Well, Rick, we're not going to discuss those stories. But, Rick, this is what I have to ask you because some of
them are very colorful.
I know that. I know that firsthand from Terry Taylor. But, Rick, this is what I have to ask you. This is what blows me away. Listen, It is a known fact. It is documented. Anybody who knows Ric Flair knows this. Ric Flair likes a cocktail or two. Is that fair to say, Rick?
Yeah, it's very fair.
Okay.
Or 3 or 10.
Okay, Rick, this is what I have to ask you. This is what blows me away about you. You like your cocktails or two. I'm sure there were several nights where you, when you woke up in the morning, you had no idea how you got there. I'm sure that happened a few times. But, Rick, you have a memory like a tack. You reminded me of a few things that I literally had forgotten about a decade ago. How does that happen?
Well, it's worked just the opposite for me. I have a guilty brain cells. Drinking, it's actually accelerated my memory and my thought process. You know, some things work reverse on other people. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because Rick,
and I not only have a great memory. No matter what time I went to bed, I got up and worked out at 6 a.m. You know what I mean? So things that are well known about.
Yeah, because Rick, you reminded me of a couple of things on your show. You know, I play at CBS, and I was like, yeah, I forgot all about that. But Rick is dead on. Hey, Rick, I want to ask you this question. I do a lot of interviews, and it's easy for me to see the pattern of the people I interview, you know, from the time, you know, when they were kids and became teenagers into their early adult life. Everything makes sense to me. But I can't imagine, Rick, I can't imagine a young Ric Flair, because the Ric Flair I know, the Ric Flair the fans know, you know, it's become, you know, legendary. It's like a Paul Bunyan type of scenario. So when I think of like a young Ric Flair, a Ric Flair in high school, Rick, were you always looking for the party, or did that come with the wrestling business?
No, not that. The wrestling business was just something that came along. You know, first of all, I was in high school 13 years. Okay, let's remember that. I was on the 13-year plan, and then I went right from there to play football at the University of Minnesota, but I had to predict 1.7 to be eligible for my scholarship, and of course that was gone within the first quarter. And I just stayed in the fraternity house for a year and a half. My parents thought I was in college.
Well, you're off to a good start.
The party. I found the party no matter where it was. If I find a party wrestling, I mean, here was a challenge. World heavyweight champion, wrestling for Bob Geigel, in front of maybe 150, 200 people, Hutchinson, Kansas, at the State Fair, out in the mud, outdoors, for 1 hour. Now, you can look up Hutchinson or Hayes, it's A or B. Been there both, right?
Mm-hmm.
I found a party that I wasn't driving back 200 miles with mud on my clothes to Kansas City. There you go.
Now, Rick, listen. Are you still looking for that party today, Rick?
No. That I can honestly say is behind me. If I stumble onto one, I don't mind participating, but I'm not in hunt. I'm not in search of parties anymore. No.
But Rick, see, here's another thing about you. Like,
everybody thinks I am. Yeah. I mean, I can't go anywhere without somebody wanting to buy me a shot. I just go, guys, no, thank you. And people are nice.
Yeah, you know, Rick. Yeah, here's another thing about you, though, that doesn't fit the mold. And I'm going to say this because I had the pleasure of knowing them. Here's another thing. Here's Ric Flair, the party animal, looking for the party since he's as far back as he can remember. Everybody knows you as a party guy. You know, the jet riding. We know all that. But Rick, here's the beauty of it, man. You raised some beautiful kids. You know, and Rick, I worked with, you know, David, of course, for a long period of time. I worked, you know, with Reed, you know, God bless him, for a short period of time. I never really knew Charlotte, but knowing David and knowing Reed, Rick, I have to tell you, these were two of the most well-mannered kids I ever met in my life. How did that happen with you always being on the road so much?
Because, to be honest with you, and pretty well known, I think now. My children were the only thing I took serious in my life. I never took a marriage serious, but I took my children serious.
Yeah, and that shows because.
And I don't mean that with any. I don't mean that to be a disparaging remark. It's just that I was focused on being the best wrestler, and I was focused on being the best dad. And that's very difficult to do on our travel, on the schedule that we travel under. But, you know, I was on the phone with them all the time, and I would fly home at my own expense for an event and then fly out an hour later. I just didn't want to miss stuff. And as my schedule became easier with WCW, because, as you know, Eric was always trying to figure out a way to get rid of me. They'd leave me home for a couple of weeks, and I just said, great. It gave me more time with my two youngest kids. I didn't have a lot of time with Megan and David because in the 80s, the regimentation and the work rate, the work schedule was just so demanding. But when I had them in the summer, which I did for like a month and a half every summer, I took them everywhere I went. From Portland, Oregon, to Texas, to Florida, North Carolina, where I live. And they traveled. They saw my life. I was working, and they'd be at Disney World over in Florida. I'd be working, and they'd be at Universal. I mean, my kids have been to Universal and Orlando and Disney more than any kids in the world. I'm sure of it.
Hey, Rick, I want to ask you this. Listen, you obviously you love the wrestling business. The wrestling business was your life, still is. But listen, let's not kid anybody. It's a very, very tough business, and especially for a Ric Flair. Rick, knowing the good side of the business, knowing the bad side of the business, how did you feel, knowing, David, Reed, and now Charlotte, they all wanted to, follow in their father's footsteps. How did you feel about that? Were you, I'm sure you wanted your kids to do what they wanted to do, but like I said, knowing.
Well, here's the misconception. Vince, this was before you got there. David never expressed any interest in wrestling, and then Eric said to me one day, what about if we do something with David, with you and Hulk and da-da-da-da, and then I said, I'll ask him, and I went and asked David. He was working for me at that time. That's when I had I had 10 gold gyms in the Carolinas and one in the Caribbean, and he said, yeah, Dad, do you think I can do it? And I said, well, it's a lot to ask you because you've never trained for it. So I took him to Atlanta, and he got to work out with Kurt Hennig and Barry Windham, which you couldn't ask for any better than that.
Yeah.
For about 10 days, and then we had the match and all that, and he pulled it off. And here's where Eric would always win. I mean, we got home and I said, "Did you like it?" He said, "Yeah." I mean, Dad, it was hard, but I had a ball. And then he got a check the next day from Eric. Guess how much it was for one night?
How much?
$10,000.
Oh boy.
He said, "Dad, I'm in."
Yeah.
What do I got to do?
Rick, you made this.
That was it.
Yeah.
And, let me just finish because it's a very interesting. It's all one story. He was doing great, and this is not about her or anything else until he fell in love with Stacy Keibler.
Yeah.
But when he fell in love with Stacy Keibler, and I could understand why, because Stacy was a beautiful girl and actually very, very nice person who I haven't seen in a while, but will always speak highly of. He immediately got in Jane Fonda workout program. Instead of working out with me, he moved to Baltimore without telling me.
Yeah.
And I woke up one day and said, "Where are you?" He said, "I'm in Baltimore." I said, "What are you doing there?" And he moved a block away from Stacy's mother, which is one of the taboos of anybody. Nobody wants to be by their mother-in-law. And if I'm offending anybody right now, I'm sorry, but that's the way I feel about it. I had a live-in mother-in-law for 11 years.
Oh,
There's
boy.
nothing good about a live-in mother-in-law.
Yeah, nothing good's going to come out of that.
I bet a lot of people would jump on that boat right now, besides for Donald Trump. But anyway, he fell in love with Stacy and went up there, and he just quit. He just quit working out. I mean, he worked out, but it was, instead of at 6:00 in the morning in a Gold's Gym with me and some other guys, he was doing the Jane Fonda with her in the afternoon, and and then of course at the building, at the arena, you probably noticed that too. Everybody's down in the ring working out, and he's up in the 20th row of the bleachers.
Yeah.
And I can't blame him for that either. I mean,
yeah,
21-year-old kid with a hot chick, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
hey Rick, I want to ask you this because you said this when you were interviewing me for your show, and I've said this a million times, Rick, and I want you to elaborate on this a little bit because you kind of said it in passing when we did your show on iPlay for CBS. Rick, so when I look at a lot of my friends in the wrestling business, I have to tell you, a lot of them are on the outside looking in. And what I realize, Rick, is a lot of them are very, very, very talented, but they're really good people. They have really good hearts. And I was the guy that said all along, man, listen, it's really difficult to be a good guy and a nice guy and exist in the wrestling business. And you told me just a couple of days ago, David was too nice for the wrestling business. Can you just elaborate on that a little bit for me?
You know, and I don't mean that. I mean that as a compliment.
Yeah, no, absolutely, yes.
Yeah, some people are made for this, and I'll be honest with you, because I always had so much fun until all that stuff went down with the company being sold to Turner and all that, and people not telling me. And I mean, I just coasted through the business, and I had fun. I had more fun wrestling than anything in the world. I loved being on the road with the guys. That's not a secret. And I was making, big money, as big as money as anybody else. And then that whole thing went down, and it was the first time that I was ever confronted with a political situation where I knew I was getting screwed. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
They could have not sold Crocker Promotions without me.
Yeah.
And it was the first time I realized that Jimmy had lied to me. And then Turner came to me and they go da da da, and I said, wait, whoa. Then a guy named Blair Schmidt-Selmer, you can look it up. He's the guy that negotiated the buyout. So we wouldn't have bought the company without you. You didn't know that? I said, no. I would have gone to Vince right away.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's one of those deals, and from that point on, it became wrestling became, for a couple of years and at different times, it became politics, and I'm not good at that.
Yeah.
And I get emotional about it too, because I want to get along and I want to have the best match, but I don't want to argue about a finish. I mean, never argued about a finish. I mean, if you want to, hey, you're going to beat me, good. Keep up with me in the ring, because nobody's going to remember if you beat me or not, because you're not going to outperform. That was my slant on the business, and I never worried about anybody outperforming me. Never even crossed my mind that somebody could. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely.
And the finish meant nothing to me. I mean, but all of a sudden it became a war. It was just like, man, you're dealing with these political issues and all the BS, and I'm like, God, this isn't the world I live in.
Yeah,
And then, when Eric fired me and threatened to break my family, and threatened to break my family and financially, because I took my son to a wrestling tournament, I don't think so. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And
I mean, here's the deal. And TBS, you sue TBS, you get paid. If I had sued TBS, I did sue TBS, and I sat home for a year. And one day, John Taylor, was saying, you'll probably remember, the attorney here in Atlanta, said, hey, you can either sit home or you're going to win this lawsuit, you're going to get rich, because the vice president of a company can't go out in front of 70 people and say, hey, I'm going to break you, I'm going to ruin your family, I'm going to starve you, which he did. It's a legendary promo on Eric's part.
Yeah.
So after a year, I didn't cash him, I had about, almost $400,000 and some in checks. They paid me every week, but if I cashed one, that means that I was admitting to, it implied that I was accepting the contract. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
So after a year, it would either go back or sit home, and I had talked to WWE or WWF at that time, and I just said, guys, I don't know what to do. I was at once again, I hate being that confrontational part of stuff. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
But I ended up going back. We had that huge thing in Greenville. My return at night was the Horseman and all that. which is very cool. But then 2 weeks later, they were screwing around with me again. You know what I mean?
Yeah, hey, Rick, let me ask you this while you're talking about this, because Rick, I had Bundy, King Kong Bundy on my show a couple of months ago, and I was talking to Bundy about the early years. I mean, Bundy was there for the early WrestleManias, and I wanted to get a feel for him of, what was the locker room like in those days? Because Rick, I saw a locker room that was, very competitive, very cutthroat, each men for themselves. Now, granted, you guys are set up in
which company?
Well, every company I work with, to be honest with you. Yeah. I mean, you guys are set up as independent contractors. That's the nature of the beast. But Bundy said to me, and he blew me away. He said, Vincent, it wasn't like that back then. He goes, back then it was really a team environment. Everybody was pulling for each other. Nobody had an issue putting anybody else over. And he goes,
no, that's not true.
Okay,
because Bundy was there with the WWF now. The same time Hogan was there, correct?
Yes, he was. Yeah, as a matter of fact, Bundy put Hogan over.
Huge tension between Hulk, Piper, Orndorff. I guess Bundy was never in that position of being the top guy.
Yeah,
I'm sure he had a good career and all that, and I only know him a little bit. He seemed like a very nice guy. But if you're talking about, Jimmy Snook, all these guys were, Don Morocco, man, they were all dug in. And did they get along? Yeah, on the surface, but there was a lot of heat. You need to bring a guy like Bob Orton Jr. on your podcast one time. Ask Bob. I heard about it. I wasn't there, but it was really competitive.
Well, Rick,
Rodney was never the world champion, but he never got beat.
Right. Well, Rick, I guess the question I wanted to ask you was this: having such longevity in the business, and Rick, from the time you started up until today, you saw the money grow to astronomical amounts as the money got bigger and bigger, and the business became bigger and bigger, especially during the Monday Night Wars. Did the political environment get more and more and more difficult? That's what I wanted to ask you.
Well, I don't know what it was like at WWE because I wasn't there, but it was a total catastrophe at WCW. I could feel, and I only saying Eric, which doesn't matter how it was done, but the locker room was divided. You had Scott, Kevin in one locker room, Hogan and Savage in another, Sting and Luger in another, and me for whatever I'm in, which was probably nothing, and Arn Anderson in another, right? And everybody, the only two guys in the group that would do business were me and Arn.
Yeah.
They kept us in the loop, but and I don't blame Sting for sticking up. I don't blame any of them because that's no way to run a business. You can't keep guys at odds, and then you're going, as you know, going to go on the air live at 8 o'clock, and the show is not done at 7:30. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's been rewritten 45 times.
Hey, Rick,
the guys are coming to the building late. Do what they want to do.
Rick, did you ever see, especially the height of it? Once we got into 96 and 97 and 98. When you first broke into the business and was starting in the territories, did you ever dream that there was going to be that type of money involved?
No, I had no idea. None.
Yeah, because I think that's what really did a lot of damage to the wrestling business when paychecks just got out of hand. The egos were fed, and I think that just opens up for political warfare between the boys.
Yeah, it's sad because if I put myself in that position and I was making that kind of money, I would have done anything to make everybody happy.
Yeah, exactly.
It was just the opposite.
Yeah.
Nobody wanted to give in to the other one, and no one wanted to do business because, they were all worried about how much money they were going to make next year. It was really difficult for me to coexist in that environment. And once again, the way I did was Gene Oakland and I went right to the bar, And we were on between a 10 and 13 Kettle One straight up 30 martini average per night.
Well, Rick, listen, I got to ask you this because that's a great note to end this. But I have to ask you this favor, Rick. Listen, we talked a little bit about business there. I don't want to talk about business. I want to talk to you. I'm a writer. I want to talk to you about creative. I want to talk to you about the persona of Ric Flair. There's so much I want to talk to you about. Rick, I have to ask you this as a big favor. Would you mind calling back in next week so we can finish this conversation and put the spotlight on the creative aspect of the wrestling business?
Only if you'll ask me why I'm considered the greatest lover of any wrestler of all time.
That will be my very first question. And speaking of Rick, I got to remind you something I saw on TMZ this morning. I got to tell you this thing I saw on TMZ. When we come back, next week, I'm going to open up with that. But listen, Rick.
Was it about me with the guy from Chicago playing my interview?
No. This is something completely different that when I have to turn you on to it because you're not going to believe what you see with your own eyes.
Okay, well, as long as it didn't involve me being in trouble, I'm fine.
No, you're in no trouble. But Rick, so next week you and I will pick this up. Is that a deal?
You got it, man. Thank you.
All right, hey, Rick, before we leave this show, tell everybody about your podcast first and where they could pick it up.
Well, first of all, I can't give you all the information because I don't deal with the technical side of it. I merely round up the guests and usually have a lot of good questions because I'm pretty familiar with not just wrestling but a lot of sports. I just know that we're on CBS. It's Woo Nation. It's Ric Flair and Woo Nation. It's co-hosted by Conrad Thompson, who is one of the most intelligent people I've ever known in my life. A multi-millionaire that just does this for a hobby. And we are the number one wrestling podcast, usually week to week, which is really great.
Yeah, and it's a phenomenal podcast. I've heard it. It's Ric Flair. It doesn't get any better than that. But listen, I got to wrap up there, knocking on the window outside of this studio. Listen, I will be back here next week with the great Ric Flair, Vince Russo.
You got me, buddy.
Ham and egg is preferred. Woo! You could follow me on VinceRussoBrand.com at the Realm Network. See you next week, everybody. All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. I'm not wasting another second of time with an intro. I want to talk to him for every second that I have. Because I have Ric Flair. Rick, please, listen, you went all last week, and I think there was only one woo. Can we open it up with a woo to begin this interview? Hey, Rick, speaking of the woo, I want to talk all creative, this second part of the interview. Now, in reading your book, I know the woo was inspired by Jerry Lee Lewis' Great Balls of Fire. As a matter of fact, Rick, I want you to know the guy that wrote your book, the hippie, from Greenwich Village, Keith Elliott Greenberg, is a very good friend of mine.
Well, I want you to know that I respect Keith, but when it comes to knowing my career, he was a complete idiot, which I've already gone on record as saying. And if Marc Madden had jumped in and had 2 weeks, because Vince gave him 2 weeks to rewrite it,
wow,
it would have been a disaster.
Well, yeah, and you,
he was writing the book. First of all, he's from New York. He lived the best does. What would he know about South Carolina, North Carolina? I mean, where I really started my career and made my name. He was a nice guy, but I'll tell you what made me so mad is he handed me a chapter, and every other word, every other paragraph started with F. He was learning like I was Freddie Blackman. That's not the way I thought. And it made me so mad because he had no fundamental knowledge of anything that I was doing back in the 70s and all that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does that. Yeah.
He's a nice guy. I'm not saying anything bad about Keith, but Keith, you was the wrong guy to write my story.
Yeah, and
thank God that I'm mad.
Yeah, and you and Madden are very close and have been close for years. So I'm sure Marc.
Well, he knows my career better than anybody. I mean, and we cross. We like other sports. He's a big hockey guy. I am too. So, but Marc follows wrestling. A little bit more from afar these days. but he's into him with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Hey, Rick, I want to ask you this. We opened up with a woo. I talked about Jerry Lee Lewis. I have to ask you this because I know your memory is sharp as a tack, as I said in the first show. Rick, do you remember your very first woo in front of a camera?
Yeah, 1974 in Charlotte.
Tell me that story, Rick.
Well, I had been there about a week, and I was riding home one night. And it must have been after I got a car because I was riding with people. So, because I didn't have a car when I first went there. I had left the car I had at home with Leslie, my wife, and my oldest daughter, Megan, in Minneapolis. So, and I was riding home, and I liked, country music and that. And on came Jerry Lee and Woo, and that's just next day I walked in the TV, and I went, woo, and everybody looked at me like I was nuts. That's not what.
Rick, you know what? As a kid growing up in Long Island, I was, of course, watching the WWF, but I was getting Gordon Soley from the Sunshine State.
Thank God, yeah.
Thank God, watching all your stuff. I loved all your stuff. And Rick, I got to tell you, and I want to get the history of this. I want to talk about the first time. Rick, as much as I love the woo, that wasn't my favorite. My all-time favorite, Rick, was when, okay, here we go. Now the clothes start coming off. Now the tie, the cufflinks, the shirt. But my favorite, listen, Rick, I don't think nothing has ever topped this for me. And you got to tell me the first time this happened, how this came out of your head, dropping the elbow on the jacket, Rick. Who comes up with that?
Did it, I'm a guy that gets in the moment, and the greatest line, of all over the years, that Gene Oakland goes, "Oh no, here goes the laundry again." So I don't know. I don't have an explanation. I'm sure a lot of people would want to intervene and have me checked in, but I just, you know me, Vince. I just roll with the moment. I mean,
yeah, and Rick, let's talk about that.
I got so much coffee in me by the end of the day, I'm ready to go.
Yeah, well, and Rick, I want to talk about that because times are different today. And Rick, I'm not saying this because you're on the air. I'm a creative guy. I'm a writer, so I'm always looking at the entertainment aspect. I'm always looking at the promos. There is never going to be, never. And I mean, I was there when it was Rock and Austin, and there are a million pairings that we can talk about. There's never going to be a Ric Flair and a Dusty Rhodes going back and forth ever. In my lifetime, in my kids, you're never going to see that. And Rick, what I want to ask you is when you have somebody that's a mirror, and can come back at you with the same promo, and now you have to top that, and he's got to top that. What was that like for you, Rick? Was it competitive for you and Dusty, or?
Oh, but Dusty and I was really competitive. Well, but back then you have to remember we weren't doing that for the internet. We were doing it for the boys in the locker room. I mean,
right.
We weren't doing that to have the internet say, this guy. I mean. That was just me and the Dream. And I'm telling you, that was so much fun because the Dream could talk. He was half white, half black. He was half Dusty Rhodes and half Thunderbolt Patterson. I don't know if you've ever met Thunderbolt Patterson, but he had Thunderbolt down better than Thunderbolt did.
Yeah, I mean...
And he could really rap. I mean, that interview they played right after he passed away, I forget it. Hard Times.
Yeah.
Give me a break. That's just one of the classics of all time.
Rick, when it comes down to the art of the promo, what was there better than Dusty in your opinion? Who would you rate up there when it comes to the art of the promo?
Well, I would always give the nod to Dusty. I think Roddy Piper was really good.
Mm-hmm.
I think Austin was good. I think The Rock was real good. It's just hard. I mean, it's one of those things I think we discussed on my show with you is that, and it's problematic for the kids today, and it's really not fair. Is the thing that the network has given people the opportunity to do is go back and look. I mean, you have the network, Vince, I'm sure you do, right?
Yes, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yes,
you can pull up Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes, Star K86. You can pull up Ric Flair. I'm shooting myself. Ric Flair and Lex Luger, Ric Flair and Wesley on Van Vader. I mean, I'm on about 10 shows every week, right? And then it's me and Nikita, and me and Dusty, and I mean, me and Sting. I mean, and I just talk about myself. All of us will apply to other guys, and all these vintage interviews are. And that's one of the things that Kevin Sullivan brought to my attention when he was on the show. He said the network is phenomenal, but it also the downside is that people are never going to forget those times. If Vince Russo, who has worked at the highest possible level for the WWE and for WCW, and your favorite stuff is back then. It pretty much says it all. I mean, I tell people this all the time. If Dusty Rhodes walked out on Raw, right, and he was 25 or let's say 30 years old when he really had his stuff together, and I don't care whether he weighed 300 pounds or 350. If they gave him 10 minutes to talk, he'd be over like nobody else on the show. In one segment. Would you agree? Oh,
Rick, absolutely. You know, Rick, the truth of the matter is, listen, I do podcasting, like you do on the CBS channel.
Yes.
And Rick, like I would review the current Raws, and I'll be honest with you. I did so many shows, and, they're 3 hours long. There's really not a lot going on. Maybe you get one highlight in a show. And it became very difficult for me because, listen, I don't want to sit there and bash, today's product. But at the end of the day...
No, you're not bashing. You're comparing.
Yes.
But in all fairness, with you and I didn't interrupt you, but the kids don't have the opportunity that we had. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but Rick, why is that? Somebody needs to explain it. Why are these kids handcuffed today? I don't understand that.
I don't have the answer either.
Lack of trust? Do they just not have confidence in it? I don't know what it is.
I would say the majority of them lack confidence, and they seek the guidance of somebody helping them. I don't think that'd be the case for John Cena.
Yeah.
Wouldn't be the case for Seth Rollins.
Bray Wyatt.
I've been to Bray Wyatt. I'm pretty sure is very comfortable with his character. The guy that can talk but gets very little opportunity to do it is Ziggler. Ziggler can talk.
Absolutely.
Well,
yes, I agree.
So they have a bunch of guys, but I think that this is the way the show is formatted now, and the kids don't have the luxury of having experience. I mean, they only got two guys on the show that have been in the business 10 years.
Yeah.
I mean, on Raw, and that's Cena North. The rest of them are 3-4 years into the show.
Yeah.
And it doesn't happen overnight, as you know. And plus, 3 hours is a long night.
Rick, I have to ask you this, and I don't want to put you in a difficult position, but I have to ask you this question, okay? Because I've been thinking a lot about this lately, but I want to ask you this first, and then I'm going to go on to something else. Rick, I know, at the training facility, because Terry works there, so I know a lot about it, and I know they're doing great things. I know NXT, the women that came out of NXT, including Charlotte, were incredible. But what I'm getting to is I know Dusty was the one there teaching promos, prior to his passing. Rick, have you been approached about that role? Because I got to be honest with you. How do you have access to a Ric Flair? And of all the people on the face of this planet, how is he not at that training facility teaching these kids how to cut a promo?
Well, here's the opportunity. I'm sure that if I reached out and asked for that, but, Dusty lives in Orlando, and that was his life. I mean, he loved that. And Dusty, he became not just the promo coach, but he became, like as an example of my daughter, who he's known since she was born, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
He became their friend, you know what I mean? And to be honest with you, I don't have the time, and I'm thanking God for that, because I've been going to San Antonio next weekend, New York the weekend after, Hamilton. I'm doing Comic-Cons every weekend, wrestling shows. I've got the podcast, which we just picked up a whole new a set of commercial people, and a lot of it came about as a result of the podcast and hearing currently with you on it. I don't have the time, and I'll tell you what else. That's my problem with the business. Now, where Dusty got so mellow and all that, I don't have the patience, and I've tried, and I mean, I would never get mad, but and this has happened several times. The people will say, "Why don't you, help the young guys learn?" And I go, "Oh, I have, but I've been a negative experience." And I told Ziggler something the other day, and I know he's going to take it to heart, or I gave him some advice on Monday night, and that was just, to work through the break. You know me?
Yeah.
Yeah, because sometimes you don't work through the break. The people don't know you're in break in the audience climb out, and they go dead if you don't. You got to keep moving. I mean, that's just the way it is. And I think that's a good tip to anybody.
Yep.
If you go to a break spot, unless someone's outside the ring, you got to keep it going. It is what it is. They can't sit there on a 3-minute commercial break and then expect the crowd to be roaring when you come back.
Right.
That's just my philosophy. But the point I was making is that I've had kids ask me what I thought, and I give my opinion. And I tell them from my personal experience and from what I've watched and what I've learned. And 2 minutes later, I'll know for a fact they're riding down the road with a kid their age saying, this is what Ric Flair told me. What do you think?
Yeah.
That doesn't work for me, man.
Rick, I saw
one and done.
Yeah, Rick, I saw this at TNA. So like this, I'm not even talking about the WWE because I know, thank God,
it happens everywhere.
Yeah,
it's not just WWE.
Well, yeah, Rick, this is what I want. This is what I saw at TNA, and it really turned me off. So many I work with so many young kids at TNA. Obviously they couldn't have paid. Yeah, they couldn't pay for like the big names. They brought in a lot of young kids. And Rick, like you, I had to teach them the promo. I had to teach them the entertainment aspect. And Rick, what I would find is every time I would try to explain to one of these kids, they knew more than Vince Russo would ever know in his entire lifetime. And there was like just a sense of entitlement that they didn't need to be coached. They knew what to do. And I got to be honest with you, when it got to that point with me, I was like, you know what? Go out there, do whatever you want to do, because at the end of the day, you're just going to wind up burying yourself. But they tended just not to listen and think they knew all the answers to all the questions. That was a big turnoff to me in my later years in the business.
Yeah, well, anytime well, first of all, I never go out of my way to offer anything. I did the other day with Dolph, because he and I are very close, and he knew my son very well, and just a great guy. But working through the break is the least of the issues. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But if you have a match and the crowd's a little tough to begin with, and then you slow it down to just not catching your breath by any means. There's no down and nose, he's in phenomenal shape. But just slowing it down rather than keeping it going, it's very difficult sometimes, unless you're in front of a very, very lively crowd, to get them back into where they're roaring, you know what I mean? Come out of break, and they came out of break, and the fans are going, we want Lana.
Right.
That wouldn't work for me, man.
Right, exactly.
They started asking for a chick. They used to ask for Fifi. But I think that's because they thought that they were going to come out to my room with me.
Yeah, it's a different.
Yeah, you start, if I'm out there and I'm working and I'm in my 20s, and they start hollering for some chick that's valeting me, man, I'm going to do a drastic move, or I'm going to take my blade and literally cut my arm off.
Yeah, it's a different world today. Hey, Rick, I want to ask you this.
Hey, by the way, I would be saying I want Lana too.
Yeah, well, I mean, Lana's incredible. I mean,
and if you weren't such a happily married guy, you might look at her too.
Rick, can you believe in this month? I think it's a couple days. I think a week or something. Rick, I'm going on my 32nd year of marriage. Rick, I've never cheated on my wife in 32 years.
I believe that you don't drink, you don't do anything wrong. I think you did it a day.
But
how does a guy that's put this much time in the business not be on a serious case of drugs, a serious dose of drugs, or booze? And you didn't either. And then you said to me, you have the audacity. I don't even know how badly you insulted me. So I look in the bar, and I see what's going on, and I say, that ain't for me. And what you were saying is I look in the bar, and I see Ric Flair, and that ain't for me.
Yeah, well, nothing good was going to come out of that. That's what I said. But, Rick, listen.
Right, and sometimes you're right.
But, Rick, listen, the fact that I'm going to be married for 32 years, I've never cheated on my wife, I don't drink. Does that make me a wuss?
No. It makes you a great guy.
Yeah, but I don't have to.
It's a real hard sell for me to believe you've been in the business this long.
But yeah, and that's the thing. I don't have the Ric Flair stories, though. I wish I had the Ric Flair stories.
No, you don't. There's nothing fun about being married 4 times. Okay?
Well, I'm talking about the road stories.
Guys, you were booked to me when one of the extras went to jail for domestic violence.
Yeah.
Everybody was texting me, boy, you did a good job. Thank God you didn't hit her back. I didn't do anything.
Yeah.
But it wasn't every paper, TMZ. Hey, Ric Flair's wife goes to jail. I might as well have gone to jail. It was all about me.
It was all about you. Of course, they're going to take advantage of your name.
Jasmin was locked up, and my name left out of it.
Hey, Rick, I want to ask you. I want to ask you a couple more things before we go. First of all, Rick, listen, you can go back and look at my podcast. I never thought in a million years I'd have you on this show, and so I'm just saying that because of this. I've said this in the past. What I've said in the past was I watched Charlotte at NXT, and what I said in the past was I said I think Charlotte could be the greatest women's wrestler of all time. And I'm including Moolah in that. And we know how great Moolah is. But when I watch Charlotte, I believe she could be the greatest of all time. Rick, this is what I want to ask you. And it's a little bit of a personal question. Because, first there was David, and David was a nice guy, and it was really, just hard for him to fit into the wrestling business. He was too nice for it. Then, unfortunately, Rick, the situation with Reed, who was also, coming into the wrestling business. Yeah. Now you have Charlotte, who is looking at, the road that her brothers took that didn't turn out the way they expected. Did that have a bearing on Charlotte wanting to go forward? How was she able to have,
No. She's on a mission.
Yeah.
And what a lot of people don't understand is she'll never be happy until she gets where she wants to be. She's always been very goal-oriented, very focused, and on a very personal note, everything she does and that she succeeds in only pushes her harder because she will text me not every day, but several times a week. Dad, you think Reed's watching me?
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah, I know it's a very personal thing, but it's the truth. She wants to do it for Reed. I mean, I'm sure there's self-gratification as well, but she's all about, she gets that Divas title at Night of Champions, it'll be dedicated somehow. She'll say, this is for my brother.
Yeah, that's
how personal it is.
Yeah, and that's
because it's funny. I tell people they argued like cats and dogs, especially over my attention when it came to sports and stuff like that. And but they were extremely close, 2 years apart. And they would, really serious arguments as children that are competing for attention of somebody or whatever, right? So, but that's what it is. So I get at least 2 texts a week that you think Reed's watching. Especially every time she does something that is really over the top.
Yeah. Hey, Rick, I want to ask you this again. You know, talking a little.
Again, let me just say, she's a better athlete and a better worker than I ever could have been.
She's unbelievable. She's unbelievable.
Everybody knows that too.
Because, you know, Rick, you know what? I just said the word without meaning to say it. This is what's missing in a lot of the wrestling today is believability. When I watch Charlotte, I believe every single thing she's doing. There's no question about it.
No, she's a shooter. I mean, here's the deal. There was a period of time when she was, you know, she felt like she was being held back a little bit. And not held back, but she was frustrated with being in NXT. And, you know, she wouldn't just recognize the fact that she'd only been wrestling for 2 years. She just wanted to go. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes.
And I mean, she said, Dad, you think I should just drop out and go get a trainer and challenge Ronda Rousey? You know what? And I said, you know, that's I'm telling you, she trained for a year. She wouldn't be afraid of Ronda Rousey.
Yeah, that would be something.
He's not afraid of her now.
Yeah.
But she couldn't give her a match. But she's so damn strong. You have no idea how strong she is. I mean, she's just, you know, all the gymnastics and all the cheerleading. And, I mean, who can walk across a gym floor on their hands?
It's unbelievable. Yeah, and she's a big girl, too, Rick.
I know. She's 5'11" and weighs, you know, $150 or $148 or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, she's muscular. I mean, she's strong as can be.
Yeah.
But she's trained like that her whole life. So
yeah, what a bright
I'm really
future.
Proud of her. Yeah, I think that I don't think she can be denied. I mean, I think if for some reason something political came up, I think that would be the worst move they could make. I'm not saying that because I'm her father, but it's in her destiny.
Yeah, there's no question about that. Rick, listen, the last thing I want to talk about, then I'm going to wrap this up because you gave us 2 weeks, man, and I can't thank you enough. Rick, I want to talk to you real quickly about our angle at WCW because I think there are some things you don't know, and maybe you have some stories like I don't know. First and foremost, listen, I'm not going to lie to you. When I came back with Eric and we were figuring out who's pairing off with who, I wanted to do – I was totally selfish, and I wanted to do something with Ric Flair. End of story. We're going to do something with Russo and Flair. And I remember, Rick, we had a match set up, you know, for the Phillips Arena. It was a steel cage match. And, Rick, this is all I cared about. I swear to you, all I cared about was I don't want to make Rick look bad. I don't want to make Rick look bad. I don't want to make Rick look bad. And I remember you met me at the power plant, and they built the cage. And I'm depending on you, like, to tell me what to do. And literally, like, within 5 minutes, you're like, okay, this is what we're going to do. And then you left, and I was like, oh, my God, I do not want to make Rick look bad.
No, but the problem is without you having the experience, you know, there's nothing to rehearse. I mean,
yeah.
It's like, you know, when I wrestled Eric in D.C., when I came back with all that, right? I mean, the people looked at that one, and because Eric wanted to actually have a match, you know. Yeah. So, what the hell? I mean, it is what it is, and I put him over. But you know, who believed it? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes.
But at that point, I was just doing my thing with you. I mean, I just was, you know, I knew in the back of my mind at that point in time we were all just walking on eggshells in terms of what our futures were. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And the company was so disgruntled. I was glad. And anytime you want to involve my kids, you're the one you told after she hit the ring. Nobody expected that, did they?
And not only that, Rick, I got to be honest with you. You want to talk about shooters. I honestly believe, Rick, if he really wanted to, Reed could have kicked my ass any time he wanted to. And, Rick, how old was he at the time in 99?
Well, let me see. He was born in 88. So
he was 11 years old.
Yeah, no. He's a tough old kid, man.
Bro, Rick, he used to hurt me. He used to hurt me in the ring, an 11-year-old kid.
No, it was great. I don't have any. I may have been, you know, appeared to be upset at the time, but you know, I was doing stuff with my son. Hoff needed to do that. He'd already done that thing with Eric where he took him down after he won the AU Nationals and all that. And I mean, he was a 4-time national champion.
Unbelievable.
The Tulsa Nationals. The only national tournament he never won was the Tournament of Champions in Columbus, which was a different format where it was 1 3-minute period rather than 3 2-minute periods. But he won the AU Nationals 3 times, the Tulsa Nationals twice. I traveled around the world. He took second in Japan in the all-kids national wrestling tournament, which was really tough because those kids are so disciplined and tough over there. So we had a wonderful time in life. It just ended too short, and I think he'd be a little frustrated right now, probably, at how good Ashley is. So, because for all Reed was and all I was, neither one of us were the athletes that Ashley is. And I'm sure he's looking down to her and very, very proud of her.
Rick, one last question, because, listen, you freed me of my hell called Vince Russo killed WCW, because you're the Pope. You said Vince didn't. Everybody listened. End of story. Can you please verify one more thing for me? Because when people say this to me, they break my heart, and you're the only one that can confirm this, Rick.
But
Rick, one of the best things I think I ever did in my career, and I'm not talking about for everybody else, I'm talking about for me. One of the things I enjoyed, when I'm really feeling down and depressed, I'll go to YouTube and I'll put it on. One of the things I love, Rick, was when David and I went to the house and rummaged through your closet, and I put on the robes and I jumped on your bed. Rick, do you know how many people tell me they don't believe that was Ric Flair's house? Will you please set the record straight?
Well, it was until 2005, then it became my ex-wife. That was a hell of a crib, wasn't it?
Oh, it was tremendous, and people don't believe me.
11,000 square feet, man.
Oh, it was a beautiful house, and I remember the lawn being so beautifully manicured. Yeah. Oh, it was beautiful, Rick.
Yeah. Well, I've had a couple of those.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they're owned by different people now.
Yeah. Well, Rick, listen, man, I can't thank you enough. 2 weeks of Ric Flair. What a gift to me. What a gift to the show. And Rick, you do your podcast now. It's the #1 wrestling podcast, on CBS. Woo Nation.
It fluctuates with Steve and Chris, but we're in there pretty much in the top 2 or 3 every week. So it's great.
And also, you haven't been doing it for that long, so you're just starting out. So those numbers are absolutely.
We're only 5 months in, so
yeah.
Give me a year, man. I guess who I'm having on next week?
Who's that?
Lawrence Taylor.
Oh, wow, that's great.
I'm about to put a number out there nobody will follow.
Oh, well, that's the thing, Rick. I mean,
I've known Lawrence Taylor since he was 19 years old.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of it. People are going to be jumping to go on your show.
Because he wrestles, too. He wrestles Bam Bam and all that. And, LT, I know you like football. LT, he couldn't even play today with these new bogus rules.
Yeah,
He killed somebody already.
That's absolutely true. And a big Panthers starting. So you're a big Panthers fan, right, Rick?
No, the Panthers, I can't stand them. Remember they almost ran me out of town when I did the thing for the 49ers for them.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about. So who?
I love Cam Newton. I really don't have a team.
Really?
I really haven't had a team. One, I like Andrew. I like Indianapolis last year because Sergio Brown was doing my 2 claps and a Ric Flair woo. So I don't know. I'll wait to see how the season goes.
Yeah, Rick, I'm in Bronco country, man. They go crazy for the Broncos here in Denver. Absolutely nuts.
No, they made a bad mistake. My John Fox and I are really good friends.
Yeah, no, he was a great coach.
I love Elway, but they should have never let John Fox go.
Yeah, I agree. A couple of years they should have went to the Super Bowl, won it, and it wasn't Fox's coaching that kept them. It was one bad play. But
I don't know. And Fox, I mean, he's just, you can have faith in anything.
Yeah.
The kid there, he's a nice guy, but he's a journeyman. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And Fox has been to the Super Bowl, 3 times? I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah, it is. It is what it is.
They should have beat New England with Carolina.
Yep.
I mean, they fired John at Carolina. 6 hours later, he was in Denver and hired.
Yep, exactly.
They fired John at Denver. 6 hours later, he was in Chicago and hired him.
Exactly. Yes.
He's a great coach, and he's a great guy.
Yeah, and that's what makes a great coach, when
Exactly.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
Rick, again, thank you so much, man. 2 weeks of this was a blessing to me. I love you, Rick.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for everything you've given me.
Call me for anything, man.
Yeah, I will, Rick. And just from all the wrestling fans, thank you for everything you've given us.
Thank you. And, and from now on, when I start doing my promos, I'm going to call myself Pope.
Oh, beautiful. No, hey, you know what? Conrad sent me a picture of you in a Pope outfit. Did you see it? Oh, it's beautiful. I mean, I said, Conrad. Yeah, I said, bro, you got to make posters of that, T-shirts of that. That would be huge. Yeah. Well, Rick, thank you for joining us, man. I really appreciate it. Ric Flair, everybody.
Have a great day, Dan.
All right, you too, Rick. Thank you.
I guess I'm losing confidence in my competence.